date is Friday the 13th, July 2001. A loan systems administrator from EI Digital Security, a cybersecurity firm, notices some strange occurrences on the network. Checking the logs, he finds thousands upon thousands of requests from different IP addresses, looking for some sort of IDA file. More on that later. He brings up the anomaly with two other researchers, also from EI, to look into it. But by the time they began to understand what was going on, it was too late. Named for the soda that the researchers were drinking at the time, Code Red was a worm that stormed the internet in the early 2000s. It started off slowly, but by 1 week later there were over 100,000 hosts infected, just about doubling every day for the next 2 days, reaching 360,000 hosts. Eventually, 16% of all Microsoft IIS web servers, about 1% of all web servers, were infected. So, how did it do this? 1 month prior to the release of Code Red, Microsoft actually posted a security bulletin, MS01-033, labeled as critical. It had the subheading, Unchecked Buffer and Index Server IS API extension could enable web server compromise. So, what exactly did this mean? Essentially, this meant that any computer running Microsoft IIS could be exploited with an attack known as buffer overflow, a low-level exploit where an attacker floods a variable with a bunch of garbage data until its container overflows. This gives the attacker access to areas in memory that they really shouldn't have access to. This also allows them to run malicious code of their own. The worm made calls for default.ida, the default IIS server data file, on Microsoft IIS web servers running Windows NT and Windows 2000. Following the command was 223 junk characters, the letter N, in order to overrun the buffer, with seemingly more junk data afterward. In reality, that additional junk data was the payload, specifying a new memory address to run the worm from, and running other computer instructions to further propagate the worm. Code Red had a few main objectives that it would try to achieve in a cyclical, month-based fashion. For the first 19 days of the month, it would replicate itself and spread by randomly generating 99 IP addresses to attack. It would attack basically at random, even trying to gain access to non-vulnerable targets like Apache servers and Windows computers that didn't have IIS. The worm would try to hijack and deface the website which the host was running, changing it to instead say, "Hello, welcome to worm.com, hacked by Chinese." Something to note about the way it achieved this was that it didn't actually attempt to change any files on the hard drive. As a matter of fact, the worm actually never even tried to get into the host's hard drive. Instead, it remained in memory. More on that later, it's pretty important. Instead, what it would do is it would infect .dll files in memory, specifically those used to run IIS services. For the next week, it would use its infected host to perform a DDoS attack against a set of IP addresses, many of which belong to whitehouse.gov. From the 28th until the end of the month, the worm would sleep, before starting the cycle anew. Being such a debilitating worm, it must have been really difficult to figure out a solution to it, right? Well, after weeks and weeks of research, experts came up with the super complex solution of turning the computer off and on again, just restarting it. Code Red just lived within volatile system memory, so upon a computer turning off or restarting, it would no longer exist on that computer. Now, that computer would still be vulnerable, of course, but if you recall from the introduction of this video, Microsoft already had a security patch out for it. As a matter of fact, they had released a patch the same day the security bulletin was posted, a month before the worm was even released, and sysadmins were encouraged to download the patch. Even though the patch had been out for a couple months, the sheer volume of sysadmins trying to get the patch at this point made it so that many who needed it couldn't download it. By the end of it all, the worm had caused an estimated 2.4 billion, or about 4 billion with inflation, in damages. It's unclear who did it, with numerous groups claiming different things. All we know for sure is that this was a wake-up call, and Mark Mayford, chief hacking officer at EI, put it best. The internet was lucky this time, as this particular Code Red program squandered its advantage and left itself vulnerable to security measures. That will not always be the case. This could have been so much worse.